Okay, evidence set 2. What about historical records? It's rumored that the Bible and historical accounts are sometimes in conflict, showing that the Bible is an error and thus not inerrant and perhaps not God's Word. What's the truth? Who's ever heard that? The Bible's just full of errors. The Bible is not telling real history. Anybody ever heard that one? Because I hear it in public all the time. Now, there's some great counterexamples of people's lives who've been devoted to looking at this. Dr. Robert Wilson, he graduated from Princeton at age 20. What does that tell you? He's beyond bright, yeah. Spent 45 years studying the Old Testament. I haven't spent 45 years studying anything. Fluent in Hebrew and all related languages. All languages the Bible translated into up to 600 AD. He didn't want his investigations to be tainted by what somebody else said about what was in the Bible. So he became fluent in all the languages the Bible had ever been translated into so that he could interpret for himself. He rejected the hard criticism that the Bible is full of errors and thus not inspired. This really came to the front in the 1800s, that the intelligentsia, the bright people, today we call them Democrats, decided that they knew what the truth was and that there's no God. The Bible's just written by men and junk. And he did not accept, he rejected the higher criticism. Now what he did was he researched the 29 kings of Israel, Egypt, Moab, Damascus, Tyre, Babylon, Syria, and Persia, as found in the Bible and on monuments. He compared what was in the Bible with what was on archaeological monuments. What he found was that the Bible was 100% accurate in terms of what it said about these kings existing, about even the spellings of their names to the point of accuracy, and what they did. Now Ptolemy, an ancient Greek, listed 19 of these kings in his writings. He misspelled every one of them. Which, with the libraries and no internet and everything of that day, that's understandable. The miracle is that the Bible got them all right. Now, interesting thing about Hebrew. Hebrew doesn't have any what?
Vowels.
No vowels, just consonants.
Punctuation.
Or punctuation. And so with the translations that Wilson looked at in the Bible, there were 2 or 3 debated spellings of the 195 Hebrew consonants that were interpreted. But again, debated, not necessarily wrong. Now, another guy, now in Wilson's case, he was a believer from the start. Sir William Ramsay wasn't. He lived from 1851 to 1839. He was educated in the Tübingen School of Thought at Oxford. The Tübingen School was deep into the higher criticism. They all knew God was junk and the Bible was junk. That was their belief system. He was the son of 2 atheists and an atheist himself. What chance this boy had? Not much. He believed in the higher criticism. In the late 1800s, he spent 25 years in Asia Minor trying to disprove the book of Acts. Now, why would he look at the book of Acts and specify down to that one?
It's a history book.
You got it. Luke mentions 32 countries, 54 cities, 9 Mediterranean islands, and 95 people groups. 65 of those people groups are mentioned nowhere else in the New Testament. Does that give a lot of targets to see if the Bible's right every time? It does. And he thought this was a treasure trove. I'm just going to show that the Bible's screwed up time after time after time. Good luck. Every reference which could be verified was found to be 100% accurate over the 25-year study he did in Turkey. When you talk in Asia Minor, you're basically talking the area in and around Turkey. How could Luke be so accurate? Luke was a medical doctor. He was a scientist for that time, but did he have access to the Encyclopedia Britannica and modern libraries and all that type of stuff? No. And yet he was unbelievably accurate. Even modern journalists make errors. I see that every day when I read the Express News. You're probably bright. Ramsay concluded, further studies showed that the book of Acts could bear the most minute scrutiny as an authority of facts on the Aegean world, and that it was written with such judgment, skill, art, and perception of truth as to be a model of historical statement. On page 89 of that same book, Ramsay said, I set out to look for truth on the borderland where Greece and Asia meet, and found it in the book of Acts. You may press the words of Luke to a degree beyond any other historians, and they stand the keenest scrutiny and the hardest treatment. When Ramsay turned his attention to Paul's letters, most of which the critics dismissed as forgeries, he concluded that all 13 New Testament letters that claim to have been written by Paul were authentic. Over that 25 years, what happened to Ramsay? He became a believer. His study made him a believer. Now, he's not the first nor the last that happened to. Have y'all ever heard of a book called Who Moved the Stone?
Yeah, I've got that book.
You've got it. You've got it. The pen name was Frank Morrison. He was actually going under an alias, but he set out to disprove the Bible, and what did he find out?
It wasn't wrong.
It wasn't wrong. Again, the Bible turned a skeptic into a believer. Lee Strobel. Does anybody know the story of Lee Strobel? He wrote The Case for Christ, The Case for the Creator, quite a few books. But why did he was an unbeliever. He set out to prove it wrong. Why?
His wife believed.
His wife believed, and he was, man, I gotta disprove this stuff for my wife, my children, etc. And so he did a study of The Case for Christ, and it turned him to a believer when he did it. How many know that Josh McDowell was an agnostic when he was in college? One of the greatest apologists of our time was Josh McDowell. Published many theology books. But he started to do a research paper in college in which he was going to prove that the Bible was junk and God didn't exist. And his study for the research paper proved to him, ooh, he's up there. The Bible's not junk. One of the favorites in the 150 years ago of proof that the Bible was junk was Quirinius, the governor of Syria. Now, incidentally, this is one of the things that inspired Ramsay to do his study. Luke says that Quirinius was governor of Syria when Jesus Christ was born. Research of extra-biblical sources and the Bible, the standard calendar is off. Christ was actually born somewhere between 2 and 7 BC. He probably wasn't born on December 25 either, but we're not sure of any of it. What?
What?
Okay.
You can go on and come back later. Calm down.
Well, notice I'm not calling the Bible an error because the Bible doesn't say December 25. Okay? It's just the calendar was not set up for 300 years after Christ, and by that time they screwed up some.
Tradition.
Not a whole lot. They were going by traditions, and they didn't have good records and that type of stuff, so they were off a little bit. One historian among them was Newton. Newton wrote more on the Bible than he did on physics. His studies told him that Christ was probably born on 9/11 2 BC. 9/11. That always struck me when I heard that. Okay, but anyway. 19th century secular shows that Quirinius made governor of Syria after 6 AD. He was made governor after 6 AD, but Christ was supposed to be born somewhere between 2 and 7 BC. Ooh, the Bible screwed up. Or did it? In 1912, an ancient inscription dated to have been written around 10 BC was found saying that Quirinius was governed Syria and Cilicia. Apparently, Quirinius was ruled in Syria during 2 different periods of time. This one supposed Bible contradiction, which was untrue, had been used for more than a century to mislead people to believe the Bible had been disproven. What happened with Quirinius? Just like some of our presidents and some of our governors, he was governor during Christ's birth, then he went out for a term, and then he was placed back as governor. It's happened before. But because they only knew for a period of time of his second term, this was used as evidence against the Bible for 100 years. Do you know that we found Jericho? Now, most of you probably know the story. They went out and marched around for days and tooted their horn and that kind of stuff, and then the walls fell out. These are the actual pictures of the ruins of Jericho. This is probably the best picture. This is an aerial photo. Why do I have arrows there pointing to sides of the walls where they fell out? Great evidence for the story of Jericho itself and the whole narrative. The Ebla was a Babylonian and Syria writing that talks about Sodom and Gomorrah. Are they in the Bible? Yeah. Life in Ur, which is in the Bible. Abraham and others. And Abraham's home city of Ur was excavated by Sir Leonard Woolley. Again, time after time, you'll find people that say, well, we haven't found this. The Bible's just full of junk. But what happens is 50, 100 years later after they say that, guess what we find? We find what the Bible was talking about. Now, one of the charges by people is that Moses couldn't write. Therefore, he couldn't have written the Bible. That writing just wasn't around at that point. Well, problems. There's abundant biblical witness that Moses wrote the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible. One of the interesting things is that these skeptics automatically discount the Bible as it can't witness to anything because it's a suspect. That's like going to court and say you're convicted, now you got to prove yourself innocent. It's the opposite of the way we normally do things. They will give other texts more credit until it's disproven. He had an Egyptian royal education. What do you think that had in it? The ability to read and write. An eyewitness to events recorded in Exodus to Deuteronomy, so he could relate it. Some people really have problems because of what? The last chapter of what?
What is it? Is it Deuteronomy?
Deuteronomy.
Yeah, because he dies.
Because it talks about stuff after he died.
Yeah.
What's the simple answer for that? Joshua completed it. And completed that and added that chapter. Contained many references to Egyptian names of places, people, and gods, as well as Egyptian words, idioms, and cultural factors. If this thing was a made-up story that Moses didn't write, that was actually written 1,000 years later or something, would they have gotten all the Egyptian names and idioms and things that were going on correct for that day? No, they wouldn't have. No. He demonstrated an outsider's view of Canaan, so it wasn't written by a Canaanite. It was written from somebody coming into that area. He was a prophet of God. As such, would he be the natural recipient of people who would tell him the oral tradition of Genesis? And if there were any written records, like the Annals of Seth, the Annals of Adam, would those automatically be accessed to him? They would. The Holy Spirit could use what was given to him to guide Moses to write the inerrant text of Genesis. Now the modernists say writing was not that developed for almost all the general public in the 15th century BC, which is when he lived. So no one, including Moses, could have written this. What we have found is multiple sets of evidence that there was complex writing, and I'm going to show you some of that as we go through here, well before 2000 BC. So this charge that Moses couldn't write and the general public couldn't write has actually absolutely been debunked. 1979, 2 small amulets, two small pieces found in the Hinnom Valley in Jerusalem and deciphered in 1989. They show quotations from the first 5 books of the Bible. These silver scrolls, positioned by the nature of their early Hebrew script, dates them before 587 BC. Now the big thing about 587 BC is the skeptics say that, well, you know, the Bible couldn't have got all this stuff right. For example, predicting that the Ammonites would be killed and then they were killed later, and the Moabites and all this other kind of stuff. So what happened was around 500 or 400 BC, there were people called redactors that came in and they edited or rewrote the Bible so that all the prophecies came true. Problem 1 is we now have scriptures which are found, quotations from the Bible, which date further than when these redactors were supposed to have done it. So it was written before this very important date in which the people who were total skeptics of the Bible believed that people just stuck in the prophecies that had been fulfilled. The Hammurabi Black Stele, or Stela, discovered in 1901 at the Acropolis of ancient Susa, the Code of Hammurabi on a stone slab. Who's ever heard of the Code of Hammurabi? It's big because that's when we got our first coded law that we see in secular writings of any type. And it was extensive law, governing a whole range of things in human existence. The code contains 4,000 lines of text and around 282 laws. Hammurabi was the king of Babylon around 2000 BC, about the time of Abraham. He was a contemporary of Abraham, and Hammurabi is identified as Amraphel in Genesis 14, one of the kings who captured Abraham's nephew Lot. So he's mentioned in the Bible. One of the most important discoveries in biblical archaeology, an original document from the time of Abraham, shows a highly advanced system of law and a remarkably advanced time period. Now, one of the things, we're now talking about secular worldview versus biblical worldview. The secular worldview, of course, the evolutionary worldview, is we were once all apes, and then we started walking upright and started running instead of oohing. And then we started drawing on cave walls, and we were cavemen, and then we became, step by step, we became more and more complex. The biblical worldview is how were Adam and Eve originally made. They're originally perfect and brighter than we are, probably. What did Adam do on day 6 after he was created? He named about 1,000 animals in a morning. Yeah. He was already downloaded with language. He was made with apparent age at that point. So one of the things that this shows is that we are not getting better and better and better. We are in terms of technology. But in terms of man and our laws, and in terms of how we interrelate with one another and how we live life, we are actually degenerating. And sadly, I see that in society all the time. That we were made perfect with Adam, and man was able to do amazing things down through history. Anybody remember in Genesis what Tubal-Cain was able to do? He was a worker of what?
Flutes.
The flute?
Musical.
And bronze and iron. Long before the bronze and iron ages. Okay? Again, we were made brilliant, and we're degenerating. Quran and Jewish writings, they verify the existence of Christ and other Bible characters. We found the plain for Sodom and Gomorrah. And actually, we have found Sodom and Gomorrah. They're on the Jordanian shore of the Dead Sea. Bab Edra is the Arabic for Sodom. Numera is the Arabic for Gomorrah. We found all 5 cities on the plain that are mentioned in Genesis 14:8. Now, all 5 of these cities of the plain are on what's called a Dead Sea rift. That's a plate boundary. What happens when a plate boundary moves? You get an earthquake. And sometimes, if it moves bad enough to where it causes a complete crack, you get pyroclastic blast. You get almost volcanic blast out of the thing, not in one place, but across the whole rift. At God's command, the rift ruptured and a pyroclastic blast burned that entire valley, all 5 cities. Destroyed the whole area along the fault. Now God was really mad at Sodom because Sodom was sitting right on top of the fault, and when that thing ruptured, Sodom fell 100 meters into the fault line. That's what we found. During the 19th century, people said, well, you know, again, this is a great example of where the critics have been. The critics said, well, the Bible says there was a king Sargon and a king Nebuchadnezzar. If you've ever done any Sunday school or if you've done any vacation Bible school, you've heard of Nebuchadnezzar, because we tell those stories all the time. But they said, well, this shows the Bible's junk because there is no archaeological evidence for either one of these guys. Isaiah 20 verse 1 is where they talked about Sargon. Sargon's palace has now been recovered at Khorsabad. Again, that skeptic argument is gone. Nebuchadnezzar's palace and library were uncovered, and you're looking at one example of writing out of that palace. So those can no longer be used by people who say the Bible's rubbish. The Ismailia Stela, 26th century sandstone slab with hieroglyphics dated to Pharaoh Wahabi, who knows what that is. But in the Bible, this guy was called Hophra, and he reigned from 589 to 570 BC. In Jeremiah 44:30, Hophra's demise is prophesied and detailed of Jerusalem and Zedekiah's fall. In Jeremiah 37:5-8, Hophra's army stopped the Babylonian siege of Jerusalem prior to 587 BC. And everything that we've detailed here that's talked about in the Bible has been verified through the writings of Manetho, who was an ancient Egyptian scholar. These are all not Bible people, these are secular people. Herodotus and Dionysius Siculus. The Black Obelisk, 1840, Austin Henry Layard. If you were a true digger, if you were a archaeologist, you'd know that this guy was the father of Assyriology. Looking for Nineveh. He was looking for Nineveh. The Black Limestone Monument, the Black Obelisk of Shalmaneser III. When they found this, it gave authenticity and historicity to some of the accounts in the Bible, including Jonah. It mentions Nineveh, it mentions Jonah, and that he was there to talk to the people, verifying the account of the Bible. Today, one of the major things that people say, the Bible says that some nut held up his arms and the sun stood still for almost a day. The Bible's full of it. That has to be wrong. To most, this is incontrovertible proof the Bible is an error. What you don't know is that many cultures have writings about extended days. The Chinese record says that it happened in their year of the world, 2554, which coincides exactly with the biblical time when Joshua's hands were held up. That's interesting. 6 Indian groups from both North and South America and South Sea Islanders have records of a long night. Why do I find that interesting? If there was a long day, what was on the other side? A long night. Most scientists today write off these accounts from around the world as mythical, and since they do not fit within their naturalistic worldview. All that we can ever count on is what we can hit or hammer. However, the number, similarity, and coordination of these accounts show that amazing evidence that a supernatural or radically unnatural event took place. Are we so locked into naturalistic mindset that we say God cannot do miracles? One of the things as a creationist, all too often we try to do is we try to explain everything by a naturalistic thing. There are certain parts that are not naturalistic. In the beginning, there was God, and there was what with him? The Trinity, but nothing else. And from nothing, he created what? Everything.
Stuff.
Yeah. You try that. You can't do it. Now, secular science calls that the Big Bang, but one of the dumb things about the Big Bang is, how did nothing produce everything? Incidentally, I'll go into this later. The Big Bang violates 2 laws of science in the first 1/2 second of its existence. At the time that nothing creates everything, you violated the first law of thermodynamics that says that stuff just doesn't pop into existence. And then within a 1/2 second it says, well, how did we get everything so spread out? And they have a theory called inflation, which says that because of the explosion, everything was accelerated to hundreds of times the speed of light. What did Einstein show with relativity of about 100 years ago? Nothing can travel faster than the speed of light. So they violate their own rules 2 times in the first 1/2 second, trying to explain what God did. There are God miracles. Some of the most interesting stuff comes out of the Table of Nations in Genesis 10. This is a listing of Noah's grandchildren and where they spread out after the dispersion at Babel. Down there at Cush, what area is that down there where Cush went? The grandson Cush. It's called Ethiopia. The Ethiopians, even today, what do they call themselves? Cushites. Because they remember in their secular records the first person to ever come down there. That's secular records verifying the Bible. Just above Ethiopia, we have Mizraim, the grandson Mizraim. What was the ancient word for Egypt before they called it Egypt? Mizraim, in memory of the first person to be in that area. The Hebrew called Greece Javan because why? Because Javan was the first person in that area. Gomer is a guy, besides being on Gomer Pyle USMC, that guy got around. There we have him pictured in the Baltics, and there are Baltic secular records that say this was the first guy here. But then he moved across Northern Europe, and there are Northern Europe records that show that he was there, and then he went on to the British Isles. All three of those areas have records showing that Gomer was the first one in those areas. One of my favorites is Meshesh. Meshesh is up in southern Russia. Do you know what the name for Moscow was before they changed it to Moscow a long time ago? It was Meshesh, honoring the first person in that area. So we have multiple secular records that verify Genesis 10, saying that they're telling us real history. Jesus Christ, the most verified individual in history. Do you know that we have, I won't just call them skeptics, I'll call them heretics today, that say Jesus Christ never existed. He's the most verified person in history. It would be easier to say the Holocaust didn't occur, which there are nuts who try to do that, or that Napoleon never existed. He was a figment of our imagination. Try to tell a Frenchman that. Exodus is not a myth. In secular archaeology today, they say the Exodus never occurred. And the reason they say that is they're looking for evidence of it in the 12th century BC. Well, it didn't happen in the 12th century BC, but they have convinced themselves out of the history of Manetho, who was an Egyptian scholar, as well as from a misinterpretation of one verse in the Bible to say it had to happen during the 12th century. We find no evidence in the 12th century. But if you go back to the 15th century, it's all there. The invasion of Canaan, Joshua's taking over multiple cities in Canaan. There's evidence of a script that's now in Europe of a guy who talks about the 10 plagues and how they came on to the Egyptians, etc. It's all there, the whole history. But the people who don't want to believe, they don't believe. Pontius Pilate, prefect of Judea, that's what that stone says on a limestone block. Again, verifying not only that he existed, but who he was, which is what the same thing the Bible says he was. Caiaphas also, who was Caiaphas?
Chief priest.
Chief priest, yeah. We found his burial casket. The Megiddo seal bearing King Jeroboam's name. Who is Jeroboam? First king of the northern kingdom of Israel. Multiple testaments to King Hezekiah. Again, these multiple testaments, where are they from? They're all from secular records, verifying the biblical account. Altogether, we can verify 105 biblical characters as substantiated as existing, and many of their exploits are chronicled in secular records just as they were in the Bible. The Bible relates real history. I have a video here tonight that if anybody wants to buy it, it was done by Del Tackett. Anybody know who Del Tackett is? He wrote the Truth Project, which you may or may not have heard of before. And it goes through this kind of material about the Bible being real history. Professor Nelson Gluck, a world-renowned scholar, stated, "I have excavated for 30 years with a Bible in one hand and a trowel in the other, and in matters of historical perspective, I have never found the Bible to be in error." It's a strong statement. And it's counter to what you hear in the public, who think the Bible, that's just passé. That was old myth, and it's not for us today. Now, does geology support the Bible? Two big words. Catastrophism. All catastrophism means is that the Bible says that the world was made in big catastrophes or big events. What would those big events be that form not only the world, but also society? What's the first big event?
Noah. The flood. The flood.
Noah's going to be one of them, but the first one's creation.
Yeah.
Creation. Then the fall, we get kicked out of perfection. Noah. Jesus Christ, that's a big one. We've only renamed our calendars for that one. Okay? So again, all of creation and all of our society have been structured by big events. What big event are we looking for at this point?
His return.
His return. Okay? Secular science, though, talks about another big word that means very simple things called uniformitarianism. Uniformitarianism basically says the key to the past is the present. The world is boring. Everything is happening today just like it has for the last 4.56 billion years.
Nothing's changed.
Nothing changes. They would agree with Solomon when he said there's nothing new under the sun, yeah. And that type of stuff. The Bible instead says, instead of gradual change, says there's been these big events. The Bible says God intervened in his reality at various times and formed our world rapidly in big events of geologic and cultural history. We looked at cultural history, let's look at the geology. When we look at the earth and rock strata, the evidence seems to point more to catastrophism than uniformitarianism. I'm going to show you that geology agrees with the Bible. Across the world is a line of discontinuity. It is found below the bottom of the sedimentary rock layers and the solid igneous and metamorphic bedrock below. This is exactly what we should find if the worldwide flood of Noah's occurred. A great cataclysm occurred and literally shaved off all the rock strata above this discontinuity. This is a picture down here from the bottom of the Grand Canyon where the granite rock meets the tappete sandstones. And we not only find this line of discontinuity or uniformity in the bottom of the Grand Canyon, guess where else we find this same discontinuity? Everywhere. We found it in Maryland. We found it in Israel. What it demonstrates is when the worldwide flood occurred, it cleaned off about 2 to 4 miles worth of rock, or rock and dirt off the top of the earth. This layer is generally placed below the Precambrian era. That's when they say life began. It indicates that all the sedimentary rock geology above this line was sheared off. The power to shave off 2 to 4 miles of rock and dirt on the entire surface of the earth. What kind of event are we talking about?
Flood.
A huge, massive global flood. No local flood. And a lot of the people that will take pot shots at the Bible, they say, well, the Bible really didn't mean a world-covering event. No, it says it covered the mountains to what? A height of 15 cubits, which is 22 feet. It says specifically that happened. If it was only a local flood, what would God have told Noah? Don't build a boat. He would have told him what? Move.
Move all the mountains.
I'm about ready to flood this entire area. Move. Instead, he gave him about 75 to 100 years to build a boat.
Something that they didn't even know existed.
Huh?
I said something they didn't even
No.
know existed.
No, he had to be given instructions for that, and the instructions in the Bible are only a start. He had to be given real instructions, and he had to teach himself a little bit over time. The Grand Canyon is a literal museum which testifies to the Noahic flood event. The walls of the canyon contain millions of nautical fossils arranged from end to end in the same direction, indicating animals and rock debris suspended in strong currents. We have thousands of feet of layers of sedimentary rock show graphically how the earth was covered by water, and the Grand Canyon itself is a vast sea life graveyard, which shows how these creatures were violently taken from their burial by a massive flood. One of the most famous creationists of our time, Ken Ham, likes to say what? if the Bible is true and if the Noah's flood occurred, what we would expect is to find millions of dead things buried in rock layers, buried by water all over the earth. When we dig into the earth, what do we find? Millions of dead things buried in rock layers by water all over the earth. And yet the secularists just miss it because they want to. One large mid-layer of the Grand Canyon, which is right above that line of discontinuity, is the Tapeat sandstones. This sedimentary layer covers not only the Grand Canyon, but extends across North America, Central America, and across Greenland. If you have a flood layer that's across all of North America into Greenland, do we call that a local flood? No.
Probably not.
No. No. The myth that the Grand Canyon was somehow cut by the flow of the Colorado River over millions of years is you ought to laugh.
Yeah,
We are because we were there.
We are in the Grand Canyon.
If you've been there and you're looking down there and that ranger's telling you, well, this cut that over millions of years, that don't pass the smell test.
No.
It don't happen. Now here's what's worse. The Colorado flows into there from the east, and when you look at where the Grand Canyon is, in particular to the plateau it came from, the Colorado initially, to cut that thing, would have had to flow uphill 1 mile. The last time I checked, water does not flow uphill. What it was cut by, and the secularists will own up to this today because they see all those problems, is that there was another large, huge lake, like one of the Great Lakes, above the Grand Canyon, and the earthen dam gave way at one point, and huge amount of rushing water came through the Grand Canyon area and cut it in just a matter of days or weeks. Now, it would cut it that well because first off, where did that huge lake of water come from? It was left over probably from the flood. And now that soft earthen dam gives way. And what's it cutting through at the Grand Canyon? Not solid rock, but still muddy debris. Very believable. The Tapeat sandstone, let's see, I've already talked about most of that.
So real quick, so for the Grand Canyon, so basically what we're seeing right now, was that that was sea level basically when it was created, or just trying to just clear that up?
Okay, well, okay.
So I know it's not cut through by a river, that's for sure.
No, let me give you a whole history of what actually occurred there. The flood occurs, and at its height, which was about at 150 days into the flood. This is all biblical description. We have probably sediments which are being laid down to a height of about 3 to 4 miles above the granite base. Now you have a period which creationists call the Erodozoic period. Now you have the lifting of the continents and the lifting of the mountains, and what are you going to have? You're going to have a huge amount of flow off the continents. That's going to cause a huge amount of erosion. So if there was 4 miles worth of sediment up there, about 2 miles of it eroded into the seas. That, incidentally, is the answer for why don't we find those skeletons and remains of the people before the flood. They're there. Where are they?
Yes.
They're buried deep within sea trenches, within the seas. But again, all that came off, and what was left was 2 miles deep of soft sediment. Now you have leftover water that was trapped in just one valley or whatever north of it, and that mud dam that was holding it back gives way because it's soft, and we have a huge water flow through the Grand Canyon area, and that whole area is cut by that fast water flow of a huge amount of water coming through it after the rest of the water had all come off the continent.
So really, the Colorado River, or what's right there, would say
Is what's left
is the remnant of the flood.
is the remnant of that bursting of that dam after the flood.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Polystrate trees. What if you think about what you've been taught about history and about geology? What should every one of these layers mean? How long did it take? According to the archaeology, according to the Secular geologists, how long should each one of these layers mean?
Oh.
Millions of years of deposition. And yet we find trees that are planted, that are sitting upright like this through 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 layers. Do you really believe that tree sat there for 100 million years? And this is a drawing, here's a real one. Or was it deposited there, and those layers actually mean that they were all set there in a very quick period of time? Mount St. Helens was a laboratory for this in 1980. It erupted, and it didn't erupt up, it erupted out. It blew out the side of the mountain. When it did, it cut a valley that they call the Little Grand Canyon and then set up a lot of debris walls. Those debris walls all have layers in them, and they took only a day to develop. Why did it set up layers? Because what happens in a plume when you have water flowing through it? What settles down to the bottom first? The biggest rocks, and then the smaller rocks, and then the smaller pebbles, and then the grain of sand, etc. You get the same layering there, you got the same layering at Mount St. Helens, and you get the same layering all over the earth. Because this did not take millions of years. It was laid down in a fast action. How do you get a fossil? Does something die and just lay there for a few thousand years and becomes a fossil? No, if something dies, I don't care whether it's in the sea. Number one, if it's a fish, they don't lay on the bottom, they what? They float. But whether it's in the sea or on land, if something gets dead, what happens? Something comes and eats it. And whatever's left, then the ants or the bacteria take over, and within a week or more, what? There's nothing left. Again, they float. This wouldn't give us a fossil. This would be gone if something died in the regular ocean or on land. But what if that dude's just kind of swimming along and suddenly he's covered by a huge amount of mud debris? He would then get trapped in the strata, which was laid down quickly, and he would be fossilized. What kind of event could have done this so that we now find hundreds of millions of fossils across the earth? The flood event. And we see that today with dinosaurs, which were covered up, and then after erosion they're uncovered, and we find this evidence of the flood. Of course, there could be other reasons why these things disappeared. There's hillbillies and all sorts of other things that eat things on the road, but the most logical answer for how we get a fossil is the worldwide flood. Why the death pose? Many dinosaurs and other animals are found in the death pose. They're craning their neck back like that. They found so many of these things that for a long time, when I was a youngster, they were explaining this by saying when they died, there was a contraction in their neck muscles that made them crane up like this. Well, what are you going to say?
I wasn't going to say anything. They probably just made that up to explain it.
That's exactly
Give
what
me
they
a
did.
pencil. I can do something like that.
Now when we take some of the animals that we found like that, they do the same thing insects do and that other animals do. When they die, they don't crane back like this. They do what?
They curl up.
They get into a fetal position. Yes, exactly right. So that's no explanation whatsoever. The next answer they had, because they don't want to own up to the truth, is that these things died. Yeah, they got into a fetal position, but they were pushed by so much water when they were laid down, it got shifted back up like that. Every time? No. Give me a simple explanation for why we find so many of these crane necks.
Trying to breathe.
They were drowning, they were getting covered over by mud and water, and what were they trying to do?
Breathe.
Get their last breath.
Yeah.
It is flood evidence, folks. Paleontologists want to just overlook it. We have seen ample evidence that the Bible's historical accounts are verified in archaeology, geology, and the light of other historical writings. We have now explored 2 of the 6 questions we posed if God wrote the Bible. We are starting to make a pretty good circumstantial case for God writing the Bible and thereby His existence. Next time we'll look at prophecy in the Bible and determine if it is specific enough and trustworthy enough to indicate an omniscient creator. Your thoughts or questions on what we looked at this evening?
Did you talk about carbon dating in this or no?
Okay, I can talk about carbon dating. That's really a scientific term. One of the things, and I'm glad you brought that up, one of the things, because Pat Robertson got this so wrong on the 700 Club. No rock strata was ever dated with carbon-14 dating. Carbon dating only dates things that were once alive. Your basic metamorphic rock was never alive. Okay? What carbon-14 dating does is it dates the amount of radioactive carbon. That's what carbon-14 is. Regular carbon is carbon-12. And it takes the sample of how much carbon-14 is in a carcass, whatever's left, and compares it to normal carbon-14. And they know that it has a half-life. That is, carbon-14 degenerates into nitrogen-14 over 5,730 years. There's a guy named Willard Libby who got a PhD in the late 1950s for developing this thing. And depending on how little carbon-14 is in there, they give it a date. Now, Libby himself said this thing has an error factor of 10% per 1,000 years. So by the time you get to 2,000 years, it's about 20% inaccurate. By the time you get to 100,000 years, this thing is 100% inaccurate. Well, it's because you're getting down to so little carbon-14, it would have all been gone by that point. But again, that's not where they get 4.5 billion years for the Earth or 65 billion years for the Jurassic end of the Jurassic period for the dinosaurs. That's all utilizing other techniques called rubidium, strontium, lead to uranium, lead, calcium, calcium, argon, etc., which have all been disproven. And when I say they've all been disproven, this is how. There is a lava flow in Hawaii that what was our first naval captain out of the
Cook?
Huh?
It wasn't Cook, was it?
No. I can't remember. Anyway, Dewey. Whatever that naval captain was 200 years ago in Hawaii, he took he saw this lava flow occurring because Kilauea was erupting. They took his captain's log of where this flow occurred, took samples of it 200 years later, used radiometric dating, and it says that that rock was created 200 million years ago. Well, no, it was created only 200 years ago because we have it. We know that Mount St. Helens erupted in 1980, 42 years ago. If we take rock samples from there and use any one of those radiometric dating systems, they will date that rock to anywhere between 50 million and 500 million years old. Wrong. Vesuvius erupted in 79 AD. If you use any one of the systems except for argon-argon's a special case, but except for those, they'll all date that rock at over 1 billion years old. In every known case, what is true about those radiometric dating systems? They're wrong for every known system. So why should I trust it for something I don't know? It's ignorant. Now, carbon-14, though, works as long as you're not going back too far. If you've got something that was made around, say, a wood bowl that was made around 1000 AD, it will give you a date between 1100 years ago and 900 years ago, and it has some fair accuracy to it. And in fact, it's a creationist's best friend. Because when you break open, and they used not to do this, but when you break open a dinosaur bone, about half the time we find soft tissue in there. Now incidentally, should there be soft tissue in something that's been dead for 65 to 220 million years? No way. It should be dry. It should be fossilized. But we're finding blood vessels. We're finding blood cells in there. And they have carbon-14. And when you date those bones, living tissue, using carbon-14, they all date below 40,000 years old. Meeting with the biblical account, not anywhere near the secular assumption is. But that's carbon-14. which is completely unrelated to the other radiometric. Incidentally, the secular scientists know how bad these radiometric dating systems are, and so they don't even use them. They use what's called index fossils. We've decided that a trilobite died out 500 million years ago, so if we find a trilobite in that level, we say the whole level is what?
Right. 500
million years old. No other data, because the radiometric dates completely disagree with that. So what's their whole system based upon? The assumption that evolution is true. That's circular reasoning. I took a logic class in college. If I had used that on a paper, I would have failed. You can't do that. Anything else that's come to mind while we're talking? And you just saw the reason why my principal, when I was at my last school, said, Scott, I need an answer from you, but I need it in about 15 words or less. Because you saw what I answered Josh with right there. But most of this stuff like that, carbon-14 is not a simple topic. I'm not surprised that Pat Robertson got it so wrong when he said, well, they've proved how old the Earth is with carbon-14 dating. No, carbon-14 has nothing to do with it. We are well done for the evening. I do have copies of our newsletter here. I have the movie promised. If anyone was so ridiculously intrigued that you wanted to see that book on Chinese writing from last time, I've got it there. And you've got your own books of what if. Any last thoughts or questions before we get out?
Well, I would say just know this: if you haven't figured it out yet, our issue in our world is they have bought so much into a lie that they cannot get themselves out. Because to admit the truth would literally bring down everything. A lot of people don't realize is that so we ask, why isn't this taught in the schools? Well, because most people don't realize is that the whole educational system is built on one guy who is an evolutionist. What was his name? I can't think of his name.
Dewey.
Yeah. So he bought into evolution, like many of the people during the late 1800s, early 1900s, and he built the entire school system off a naturalistic worldview, because that's what it really is. It's a naturalistic worldview.
That's a portion of my next book.
Yeah.
Dewey was a huge part of it,
Yeah.
but so was Louis Brandeis, who made the court liberal. People are going nuts right now because this is the first conservative court we've had since the time of Brandeis in the 1920s. And they don't understand the decisions of these people. Well, all they're doing is interpreting the Constitution, but somehow that's become alien. We're not supposed to do that.
Yeah. So that's why, and there's such a, it's a spiritual battle. Okay, I mean that's why people like Scott and what he does, and people even like Ken Ham, who in the media will just make fun of, will try to push aside, and all that other stuff, because the reality is they know this is real stuff, and no one wants to admit that they're wrong. And that's exactly what's happening. So I mean, that's why this stuff is important, and why this can create a lot of tension is because we all grew up in a system that was a worldview. We didn't even realize it, but we all grew up in a system that was heavily influenced with this type of thinking. And then when you start to investigate, you start to learn. And I mean, even what Scott was saying, the Bible is the most scrutinized book in the world. No other text is scrutinized the way the Bible is. And if any other text was, it would not hold up. It just will not hold up. But only our scripture does. And I mean, and God invites it, plain and simple. So just so know, like when you hear all these things, I know it may be something new, or maybe you're not understood, or you're like, what? Well, it's because there's just years upon years of what we call bad science.
I would have published a year earlier, but I did a year's research. I thought I was going to add a chapter on all of the things that people have charged the Bible with being in error on, and have an answer for each one of those. After I did a year's research, I found out my book was now going to become the Encyclopedia Britannica.
Yeah.
and no one would want to publish or read it.
Yeah.
So I gave up on that one and cut that chapter out, because as you say, people have been taking pot shots at this for more than 2,000 years, but when you study them, when you take a look at what they say, they don't hold up.
Yeah. And I mean, we talked archaeology today, and you know, they're still finding stuff. And one of the big finds, they haven't really talked about it, but it's getting there, because I know a friend who's a pastor who has friends who are archaeologists, is David. Y'all may not know this, but in archaeological world, a lot of people say David's a myth. King David, like, did not exist. Like, there's not a guy like that ever appeared anywhere. And they're just now starting to find his stuff.
Yeah.
Like, they are finding his kingdom.
Yeah.
And once that's found, I mean, that's going to be a big deal. But, you know, yeah, but here's the truth. They're not going to tell that on the news.
Right.
It's not
To his point, there's been 200 years of criticism that David's a myth and he didn't exist.
Yeah.
But we've now found an Egyptian slab that talks about David and Omri. Omri was their name for Israel, the Egyptian name for Israel. And now we've uncovered the city of David in Jerusalem. But again, are you seeing that on the headlines of the newspaper?
No.
Not the Express News.
And just know they would find things quicker if there wasn't all the other junk going on in Jerusalem. Like that. So just know, it's like, it's there. And I mean, once again, Bible holds up. So, all fascinating.
Scott, when did the Time Magazine God is Dead come out?
I have no clue.
1970 something?
No
It was
clue.
just
No, I
about
think
the
it was-
time.
I think it was before that. We were in school in the 60s and it was a thing.
Yeah, but I think I was at UCLA when that came out.
No, I remember being at Penn State.
Yeah, that's when Time figured it out, but as we showed you, people have been making that declaration since the 1800s.
I couldn't believe it when I saw it.
Because
I was
understand
subscribing
that-
to that magazine for my news.
Understand
got
this,
smart.
whether you're a skeptic or a scientist or whatever who's trying to put this stuff out, one of the big things against owning up to, ooh, I'm wrong, the Bible's right, there is a God, ooh, why don't they want to admit there's a God? Because then I was created by Him, I'm owned by Him, and I'm responsible to Him. And that's a line they will never cross.
They'd have to give up some power and
They will
prestige
one day.
and all that.
Okay.
Yeah, one night, that's for sure.
Yeah, Carl Sagan, who was probably one of the biggest evolutionists of all time, he's now a creationist because he's met God. He's sadly in a bad place, but he's met God. Let's pray and close. Lord God, thank you for this time together. Thank you for this great group. Thank you for them putting up with me. Thank you for the ability to see that your word is substantiated, and this is not a blind faith, but one in which you have given us real hope. We ask this all in Jesus' name. Amen.